And welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. As more often than not, what happens on Chef AJ Live is I get my guests from referral from other guests, and today is no exception. Today's guest was referred by the vegan publisher, Mitali, and his name is Omaid Hiwaizi. Please welcome him to the show. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, Chef AJ. Great to be on. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah. So why do you think Mitali referred you to the show?
I don't know. I think we're trying to do some stuff that's interesting and, maybe a little different, certainly quite progressive to do with how to change things, in the ways that we as vegans want. I guess you may have thought it would be of interest.
Well, that's fantastic because I always appreciate suggestions from past guests. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself. When did you become vegan and why?
Right. So I'm 54 now, actually. I recently had a birthday and I turned vegan when I was about 24. So some years ago. And what it was I was already a vegetarian since being a teenager. I just didn't like the idea of animal flesh. And then at that point in the UK, there were a load of protests of folks complaining about the export of live calves to France for them to be raised as veal, turned into veal, because in the UK it's illegal to do that, to keep them in crates. And I noticed that actually the people complaining weren't vegans, they were just kind of regular folks thinking this is appalling. And that kind of piqued my interest as a vegetarian, thinking what's going on here? When I looked into it and I saw how that industry was connected to the dairy industry, I thought, well, not in my name, and just disconnected from all dairy overnight, really. I didn't realize how cruel the dairy industry is. You kind of, in those days, being a vegetarian is what you did to be kind to animals. The bigger picture wasn't that obvious or visible as it is now. So that was a long time ago when, actually impossible foods didn't exist. And, actually a lot of people, when you said vegan, didn't know what you're talking about. So that was interesting. And I put it this way, I think, vegan options are by default now in most places I go, and life's a bit different.
It's interesting because I've been vegan for 46 years, but I didn't even know the word for the longest time because I don't think there was a word. We just said we were vegetarian, even if we weren't eating dairy and eggs. That's what we said we were.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the history of when the word was created, but it was created by, I think it was in the UK, and someone just kind of contracted the word vegetarian. And anyway, it'd be interesting to look up, wouldn't it?
I think it was Donald Watson, and I think you're right. He was English. Let's see, where did the word, I'm going to thank God for Google, right? But I think you're right. But I don't think I had learned it for many years. It said the word vegan was invented by Watson and Dorothy Morgan, a school teacher who would later marry. The word is based on the first three and the last two letters of vegetarian because it marked, in Mr. Watson's words, the beginning and the end of vegetarian. Absolutely.
Interesting. I know in India, they talk about what we're talking about as vegan as pure vegetarian.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite an interesting way of looking at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you bring up an interesting point because we want, if any animals not eaten is a good thing. So fewer animals eaten is a good thing. But I always found it interesting when people became vegetarian out of compassion, when, as you mentioned, the dairy industry might perhaps be the cruelest of all of the animal agriculture industries.
I mean, certainly that's how I feel about it, with the consciousness that cows have in particular, losing their children,
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that, when you think about globally, how few people are vegan, and even there's more vegetarians than vegan, but when you think of the whole population, it's not something that's on most people's radar, and I don't know if it's, why. Is it the compassion, you think? Is it just the addictive nature of certain animal products? Is it culture? Because it just seems like so logical to me that if you see a movie like Earthlings or Forks Over Knives, everybody go, oh yeah, that's right. But that's not how it is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my view on it is it's cultural mainly, and that's why it's so hard to change. Like people's identities are tied up in their culture, and they take any change to what they do or their environment, very personally. And so it can be a big decision for people to shift those things because they think they're changing who they are. I, I think my view would be they're changing who they are for the better, but I guess that's a converse, like a different people have different views on that. But that's why I think it's so difficult to even talk about with many people, because if you raise the topic, even people sometimes take it as a some kind of attack on them because you're saying that something you would make a different choice to them. And so I think that's quite interesting. And actually, that's why in my head, while I think raising awareness is fundamental of the issues, I actually think that system change, changing things around people, can have a huge impact, and maybe even more, Frank. Well, actually, I would argue definitely more than purely kind of education and so on, because people will just take the defaults that they're used to and so on, and if those options shift, then people will take different options.
What's interesting is that, when I was 17, 46 years ago, nobody was talking about the environment at all in 1977. And now that is one of the reasons that especially I see younger people going vegan,
Yeah. I mean, so talking about if people accept the impact of animal agriculture and in particular industrial animal agriculture on climate and climate change, then it becomes a universal truth that we can all, I mean, put it this way, I think anyone who doesn't think that climate change is happening are probably difficult to have any kind of rational discussion with. But if you can connect animal agriculture with climate change, it becomes a unifying kind of topic for, I would say, for the rational. and even if people don't emotionally switch their habits overnight, it gives them a kind of direction that most people think, well, maybe I should change my behavior a bit. So it's not the same as having an objective based on justice, animal justice, and but actually I would argue it's progress. I mean,
Yeah. I thought it was so interesting because I never influenced anyone to become vegan or vegetarian throughout most of my life. Yet, when the movie Forks Over Knives came out, so many people jumped on the bandwagon because, in a way, it's kind of sad because it wasn't until there was something in it for them. In other words, they saw that they could get off medication, improve their health. Because when I went vegan, the only reason to go vegan was, out of animal ethics or compassion. I mean, because like I said, the conversation of the environment was not around in the 70s, and I didn't care about my health because I was a junk food vegan. So I think it's interesting to see how veganism has evolved.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I my workouts, let's put it this way, my career is in advertising and marketing, outside the project we're talking about. And one thing I've learned very well through doing that for a long time is if you want people to be engaged and then act on something, usually with advertising, buy something or create a habit to use something, you have to very much appeal to benefits which are really, really powerful to the individual or big groups of people. And yeah, I mean, if in your view of the world, humans are in a certain position and non-human animals are in a different position or are subordinate or less important or irrelevant according to some hierarchy that you've learned since being a kid, because in all of the kids books that we have, there's a kind of nuclear family, and then they have pet animals, and then they have other animals which have another which they eat, and so on. That hierarchy is very clear in people's minds, and actually shifting that is difficult. But then also what it means, if that hierarchy is clear, then you think then maybe making these choices doesn't matter, because actually those animals are there for that purpose, and that's what I've grown up to believe. So I can understand how it happens, but yeah, it doesn't make, put it this way, it doesn't make sense to me. And actually taking the conversation to climate, even though it misses the point, it in many ways I would argue is easier for people to to take on board when that kind of level of habit is so deeply ingrained in people. I mean, one angle on it as well is price, the cost of food. The reality is, if you factor in the total cost of cleaning up the mess of animal agriculture, in particularly industrial animal agriculture, then actually the meat and dairy and so on would not be, it would not be economic to buy it if you actually paid the whole cost. If the cost included the impact on the climate for a beef steak, then actually who would buy one? And so they're being subsidized. And actually, in many ways, the farming and eating models we have is throwing the cost into the future, which is kind of, it's hard. It's quite a, what I just described obviously isn't a straightforward thing, and it won't be in people's minds, but I can see why habits are there as they are now.
Yeah, you said you did. What is your work exactly, and how do you incorporate your ethics of veganism into your work?
Yeah, I mean, so like what I've done is I've had a career in advertising digital agencies, and so that's doing those campaigns where people get to hear about products and then sort of think that they would like to try them, you start using them, and then maybe create habits around them. And I would say that actually, while I've never worked on products which I despise. If you work in a company and a job comes in, you kind of all have to get involved. And over that journey, I've learned quite a lot about how to kind of communicate clearly to people, how to get them to see the value in something, see the personal benefit in some product or some service or some idea, and then be drawn into it. I would say that actually I haven't been able to reflect my my views in terms of animal justice and veganism very much at all, other than kind of jumping on if any particular piece of work had to do with it was in that space, I would kind of get very involved and do the best work I could. But one thing I would say is, in that journey, which is I would argue a very I mean, fundamentally what you're doing is driving growth in capitalist companies. That's what you're doing. That's the job. That's what advertising does. Doesn't mean it's always does bad things, because it depends what that business does, whether it pays its way, whether it does good, and whether it can helps people achieve stuff, or and not all products do at all, but some do. But what I realized actually is that in that journey there is a sweet spot sometimes, which if you find it, where a company or a product can do good, and it could be good in environmental sense, it could be good health ways for individuals, it could be good in terms of a social impact sense. And if you're smart enough to align that with the thing that drives purchase or growth, then you're kind of winning, because the more you succeed in terms of growing your business, the more good you do. And if you can align the two, then for me that's a kind of beautiful sweet spot. And I came through that journey thinking, well, where are the opportunities where you can align those two things together? Because if I'm going to spend my time doing work, then why don't I do work that's like that, rather than just random stuff to. I mean, the most bizarre things is when you have, sometimes you get these consumer products where say what's it called, that stuff you put in with your washing to make everything softer and smell nicer,
like fabric softener.
Yeah, like fabric softener. So some of the clients I'd work on would have a range of fabric softeners which are all the same product in different smells. And so you choose one of those, and sometimes the new news was they'd come out with a different fragrance. And I was like, why am I spending my time trying to create interest in a category where nobody's interested, because the new news they've come up with is they've come up with a different formulation for the smell. And I'm thinking, well, okay, fine, it does create interest and gives a reason to purchase and all that. But also I'm thinking, really, is there not, there's better ways to spend one's time when one's alive. And so that's where I got to. I don't have a problem at all with commerciality, if I'm honest. But I think that I'm very passionate about finding where kind of commercial models can align with positive impact, because I think that there's a sweet spot there. Not enough people pursue that, or if they do pursue it, it's entirely cynical. It's not in the core of what the business does.
Yeah, the title of every day's broadcast, I let the guests choose it, and you chose the title, A Sustainable Future for Farming. What do you mean by that? And you mentioned you might have a few slides. If you wanted to share, that might be a good idea.
Right. Yeah. I mean, okay. So I wanted to think about what I could do around farming, and in particular with the objective of, let's say, reducing or removing animal agriculture. So certainly removing industrial animal agriculture, but obviously, I'm a vegan, and actually I've spent some of my time in recent years doing activism. I've stayed away from the the kind of upfront stuff because of I need to, I've got others, I help in the background, let's say, on a few things. My daughters actually all got involved in doing protests and things like that, and that kind of kind of pushed me along to find ways that I could have an impact. So I did that, and then I thought, well, is there a bigger way I could have an impact? And so animal agriculture was the thing. And when I looked into it, I did some research, and I worked with a consultancy, and it is the truth that animal agriculture creates a huge proportion of global greenhouse gas emissions. And it is the truth that animal agriculture, farming in general, including animal agriculture, is barely profitable. And the question in my mind is there a way to change the way that animal agriculture, or the way that farming happens, to reduce or remove animal agriculture, which could coincide with the farmers making more money? And that was the question I had, because and actually, is that change, the removal of animals and the shift of practice towards rotation-based arable, regenerative farming, as I discovered it in this journey, and other kind of aspects of uses of the land which are carbon positive and monetizable from a kind of carbon and biodiversity point of view. And that was the question that I came to. So working with a few people I kind of found along the way, we've put together this project called Refarm Fund, and I'll just show you a few slides very, very quickly, if that's okay.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
So can you see that okay?
Yes, just make it in the other format would be perfect.
Yeah. So slideshow.
Perfect. Almost perfect.
It's just loading. Okay, so we get, yeah, great. Nice. So Refarm Fund is, we describe the sustainable future for farming, and by sustainable we mean both financially sustainable, because farmers, generally, unless they're the kind of big nasty industrial farmers, are on a knife edge commercially, financially, but then also shifting farming to being environmentally positive. So i.e. reducing, making it carbon positive, and so on. And one thing you'll notice actually is that in this presentation I'm going to go through, the word vegan doesn't come up at all, and that's very deliberate. So Refarm Fund provides finance and expertise to accelerate the transition to regenerative and sustainable farming approaches and more. And the point here is that farmers are in difficult financial situations, have challenges raising finance to at all, but certainly to transition to different kinds of farming. And then also they have problems in monetizing their positive impact on the environment. So what we do as Refarm Finder, what we plan to do is to create some core technology that looks at different kinds of farm transitions away from, let's say, environmentally negative practices, which are animal agriculture and intense arable, very strongly arable with intense monoculture farming supported by chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and shifting that through to rotation-based arable, what's often referred to as regenerative farming, old style farming, and then also factoring in the opportunities around renewable energy projects, and then also, as I said before, the monetization of those changes. And actually, when you look at the actual problem, it's very, very clear. We did a load of research, some of our own research, as well as stuff that's been published, in terms of conventional farming, let's say, and the fact that it produces huge amounts of greenhouse gases. The farmers are under huge stress. They're damaged. Industrial farming damages the land. The fact that regenerative approaches, sustainable approaches, not only capture carbon, but also increase profits and, over time, rebuild the soil health. But what we found was that farmers are, generally, anxious about trying new things because of a lack of knowledge, and access of capital. And then, all of those things linked together is actually maybe, an amount of investment overall required, which is too big a risk to move forwards, even though, actually the promises are great and big. Some more research that we found, which kind of looked into a little more detail about why farmers might be thinking about giving up, because actually, there's not enough in it for them, about the kinds of things that farmers would prioritize in changing what their farming would be like, and then also what they see as the risks, as well as what they need to move forwards. So off the back of that, we developed a proposition that looks like this. I mean, certainly conceptually it looks like this. The core of it is it's a financial product. It's transition finance, so that farmers can work with us as a broker, where they'll have the opportunity to, via a transition plan, seek the assistance they need financially in terms of expertise to do that. So the core is transition finance. What they'll do in parallel with that is run their farm with land management solutions that may be ours, or working with partners. They'll have access to farming expertise. So we have one model where that's available, regenerative farming expertise, that's available through individuals, but also we're looking at an AI way through that as well, where farmers can ask questions and an AI will be able to give them extensive answers. And then finally, access to what we call the Refarm network. So the opportunity to monetize the positive environmental impact they have, access to the renewable energy projects, and other things. Down the line, when we build the app, it might look a bit like this, where on the left-hand side, they're making a loan. They're typing their basic details about their farm, what kind of land it is and so on. And then the kind of loan that they think they need. And then the system would give them indicative terms on that loan. In the middle there is just a view of what the land management stage would look like, where their farms are coded onto a map, and their fields are coded onto a map, and the various stages of the transition are logged as they go. And then on the right is a view of the loan outstanding, and the key difference here is the carbon and biodiversity credits that they accrue sit in an account and effectively offset the loan amounts, reducing the cost of capital. So in that scenario, like I said before, it's a way of turning doing good into commercial success. Yeah, and what we're trying to do is align those two. A little bit below the bonnet about how it works. So, you know, we have a load of inputs to do with how the finances will work, to do, and actually the project is, you know, we're working within a section of Barclays Bank in the UK called Rise. It's a fintech incubator, and getting some support from them about the criteria and the way that the loans would be, the technology and financial requirements for accessing the loans. We're also doing some of our own research around farming analytics. So working with a number of farmers to understand their farming methods, and where in particular positions in the recent past, how the various business plan for each year of the transition has gone in terms of reduced or increased inputs and outputs. And then finally, with the same folks, to measure the environmental impact. The point being, this kind of clever calculator in the middle can look at historical data, and then also, and the point is, when a new opportunity comes in, it'll be able to give an indication of the you know, potential likely outcomes of that transition from a, you know, from a profit point of view, but then also you know, in terms of the potential opportunity around the carbon and biodiversity impacts and monetizing those things. You can see that, you know, broadly speaking, what we're doing is looking to benchmark the difference in the farming activities. So some of these are labor costs, some of them are costs of avoiding costs of pesticides and fertilizers, and then it comes down also to what the yield is in the end. So obviously shifting, one thing that's super interesting is, even if you start ignoring kind of livestock, but if you start with intense arable and shift to rotation based arable, your returns go up, although your output goes down. So the amount you produce every year goes down, but actually, because it's so much less cost of inputs and labor and supplying, you know, spraying all that pesticide and fertilizer, you actually end up making more money based on the amount that you've invested, and so on. And this is also true for livestock, but obviously the thing with livestock is the, you know, huge negative environmental impact of doing it, as we all know. Going forwards, you know, we will target different groups of farmers, in particular, starting in the UK where we are. Some of this community are people already on board, regenerative farmers. Others we've called here younger farmers. So these are farmers who may be the kind of new generation, maybe their future is to take on the farm that the family's had for many years. Maybe they've branched out on their own and they're renting some land elsewhere. But they, from experience, seem to be the ones with, you know, the most, let's say, the less friction in terms of trying new things. And then agribusinesses, so businesses who aren't necessarily focused on farming the land, but actually are looking at efficiency. And we see a scenario with this where actually we can support a bunch of those guys who have a positive carbon impact, and grow huge volumes of vegetables, fruit and vegetables for people to eat. The issue there is obviously making sure the energy required for those huge greenhouses comes from renewable projects as opposed to off the grid, and so on, both from a cost and from an environmental impact point of view. To get down the line, what we're doing is building out a bunch of research, a series of case studies. This is the first tranche. One of our team is a Cambridge academic, and he's overseeing this. And yeah, the point here is to capture a large number of farm transition case studies, initially identifying the problem very carefully, building out, the study amongst many farmers initially. Here we're talking about 10 to 15 initially, and then building it out. Where we are at the moment is looking to see the ways in which we can hugely upscale this activity, because that's core to us, our success. Just to kind of quickly flash up the core team: myself, a governance expert, Gordon, Carl Magnus, who's the Cambridge academic, who's overseeing the farm data, and Olivia Spinkle, who's overseeing our approach to sustainability and supply chain. So that gives you a kind of quick overview of where we're at as a concept. And as you can see, from the point of view of what I was explaining to do with what I had, the insight I'd got from my kind of commercial work in agencies is, and other commercial work I've done is there a way of finding opportunities in business which have positive impacts, but also align with, financial objectives? The point being that it's very, you'll get a lot more done, put it that way. And it's a pragmatic view. I tell you, Chef AJ, is it okay if I just digress a bit? Because the moment, sorry, I've talked a lot, but the moment that it really came to me when I was in agencies, and I worked for some big agencies, was at the time, this is some years ago, there's a nappies brand called Pampers. I don't know if you have it in the US.
It's diapers.
That's diapers. Yeah. So it's very popular. So for many years they had a promotion on Pampers in many countries called One Pack, One Vaccine. And what it was if someone bought a pack of Pampers, obviously they cost a bit more than other ones, and actually I'm not sure on their environmental credentials. I suspect they're better now than they were then, but I don't think there was a positive environmental choice at the time. But what it did do is promise to have a child in the developing world vaccinated. So that had this kind of huge emotional value for the person buying the Pampers. And for many years, this drove huge amounts of sales of Pampers. Now, what that did was it took the budget that would have been for a competition to go to Disneyland or something like that, or a free plastic thing with every purchase or whatever, and put that as a budget to a NGO in a developing country to deliver vaccines to kids. And I thought that was magic. And when I heard that, I thought, wow. And there was another client that came to us and said, look, we want a copy of this. We want a copy of this. And I said to them, look, what we need to do, like I was in a meeting with a client, and we'd done a load of work for I won't mention who this other client is, but we'd done a load of work about what this program could be like for their products. And I needed to understand, actually what's the heart of this? Like, what do they need to do? Because we talked about various objectives, and I wanted to know what they wanted to maximize. Yeah. What was the real driver of this activity? And the various options I'd put on the screen varied from do more good all the way through to make more profit. Yeah. And various scenarios in the middle. And I kind of put it to them saying, look, can you guys kind of say, like, where are you at with this? And they all went quiet. And then the senior client looked up at me and said, make more profit. Mm-hmm. As you can tell, my reaction, I didn't express it at the time in a client meeting, but my reaction was extremely negative. But when I went away to think about it, I realized she was completely right. Like, the only thing that matters in that business is to make more profit. Now, what she was saying was that this needs to make money, otherwise it's a one-off. Yeah. And when I came away from that, I was thinking, because all that other stuff, generally we call it greenwash. Yeah. People say, some company says, we're doing this great thing, it's going to help the local people, it's going to help the people in that place, whatever, we're going to change the amount of water we use one day a year, whatever. Like, they have a press release, and then they just go back to what they were doing anyway. It's meaningless. But this is the thing that was the thing that happened that really crystallized the thought for me, saying, well, actually, if you can make the doing good part of the way you just do business, and what you do for business is to make money, and I'm very clear, having spoken to many farmers, like, they love the land, they love their traditions, but actually they're business folk. They need to make money. They're in it to make money. It's a job, it's a business. And the more money they make, the more choice, the more stuff they can buy, and so on. And actually, we don't like talking about that, but there's nothing wrong with that at all. Of course, they need to make money, but in my mind, the trick is how to align some kind of positive impact with that, and then the whole thing becomes a no-brainer. Now, yeah, I mean, I've talked quite a lot. Now, one thing you might say to me is, why haven't I not mentioned the word vegan in all of that? Well, actually, it's a good way to stop any conversation. In my mind, particularly with these folks, in my mind, there comes a point where they're making the transition plans, and they've got the choice of different choices. And if they take animals out, then actually they make more money. Then it becomes a choice. And I think this whole thing just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy by setting up the system in that way. I mean, that's where it all comes from.
Well, where are you in this process of realizing this dream?
So yeah, we're doing this research to let's say gear up the engine, and what we're looking to do is increase the intensity of that research. We're doing it by building out our network with partners who can walk us into farmers and allow us to access more data. And we're also looking at ways of getting some grant funding from the UK government to help do that. So we're in the middle of that cycle at the moment of doing that. Really, what we need to do is get very, very confident about the amount of data we have. Not because what we're saying isn't true. It's just that, if we're going to have people make business decisions on our data, it needs to be done to a certain level of reliability. So a big enough study so that can happen. So we're doing that work, and then we'll be able to move forwards from there.
Here's an interesting question from Carlene. How can we tell which companies are environmentally responsible and which are just greenwashing?
Oh, that's so difficult. Yeah, it's so difficult. Gosh, how would I do it? Well, I would assume they're greenwashing, if I'm honest. If they're a large corporate, I would ask myself, how intrinsic is your claim to what you do? If they're saying actually they have some positive impact in some way, is that just like an advertising line, or actually is it really, really deep in what they say and what they do? I guess it's hard. It's like I'm quite cynical about it all, if I'm honest, until a business kind of really says, actually every day we do this, as opposed to, I think sometimes if you see a claim and you just Google the claim and try and get to what the evidence was, sometimes it just falls apart, and you realize actually they've taken some small statistic and turned it into a big claim. But that does require a bit of kind of looking into some reports and so on. So if I'm honest, I think it's quite difficult. Any business that produces animal products and says either in my view, either they're good for you or they're good for the planet, isn't telling the truth. But I think most people listening here I think would agree with that anyway.
So if we can find a way that they can make as much or more money, they would do it. That's the key, isn't it?
Well, I mean, why have the large kind of consumer products companies all brought out plant-based ranges, and are looking to increase those plant-based ranges? Why are vegan independent supermarkets having a problem now? Because actually in the regular supermarkets there's more and more plant-based food. It's because it's a kind of growing commercial opportunity that they're looking to realize, and so that kind of tidal wave's happening. It just makes me like where I live, I always support the local vegan supermarket as well as going to the big supermarket, on a regular basis, because I'm thinking, well, I can see what's happening here. But yeah, I don't think like a commercial company, well, commercial companies aren't constructed to do good. They're constructed to make money. So if if we realize that, then actually that's our opportunity to influence them by what matters to them, put it that way. This idea refarm fund, which I've shared today, is like a different angle on that, where the companies we're looking to influence are farmers, and looking to say, well, what do you need? How's this good for you? And encouraging you to move in that particular direction. So that I guess it's put your money where your mouth is, put it that way. Spend your money on things that you believe in, and the system will see there's an opportunity there and chase the opportunity, I think, in broad terms. I do think, actually, if we kind of talk about veganism again, as climate change gets worse, as it is, I don't know if you guys have seen the temperatures we saw last week and the week before. I think the 2 hottest days ever in the world were 2 weeks ago, or 2 or 3 hottest days ever. And in Europe, there's huge problems in many Mediterranean countries, which are the breadbasket that kind of grow quite a lot of the vegetables across Europe. I think when we're in those kinds of environments, the market dynamics change anyway. So if you've got the option to grow food for people or food for animals, and there's a limited opportunity to grow food, what are you gonna grow the food for? And so I can see things moving in that direction anyway, as there's a limit to the amount of, or where the land is viable for growing huge amounts of crops and so on. The other factor I think that's happening is to do with visibility of the total cost of food. This hasn't happened, but it's being discussed, where if a particular food has an additional cost, then why not bake that cost into the cost of the food? It hasn't happened in the UK. I think it has been discussed, and I think it may have happened or is being discussed in the US to have a sugar tax. Yeah. And
I'm not sure about that, but I'll see if that's true. That could make sense.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm being careful about what I say, because I think I think there may be some particular places where it's been implemented, but in other places it's just been discussed. But the idea that a particular product has a long-term impact on type 2 diabetes or category of products, then why not bake that cost in to the cost of the product and disincentivize people to buy it, and then also pay for the impact? Well, I personally don't think it's that many stages away from that happening to let's say animal products and so on, in terms of their environmental impact. And we'll see, because to be honest with you, if that happens, like I said right at the beginning, if we pay the full cost of those things, I think that most people would not buy them. And if they did buy them, that we'd be back to, let's say, the amount that they ate, people on average ate several hundred years ago, which is once or twice a year, which for me counts as progress. Being a pragmatist does count as progress. So I think there's different ways through it. I'm just talking more philosophically now about the way that I think that this world, the way that different factors will go. One of the things I discovered talking about climate change in farming is I recently was in discussions with some farming folks in Northern Europe, in Denmark, and they one of the comments that they said was that farmland in Denmark is already increasing in price on anticipation that in Southern Europe it's going to become less farmable or unfarmable. So currently places which are colder are going to become warmer and are going to be more relied on in Europe as the breadbasket than the current kind of, let's say, Mediterranean. So the kind of the great weather and so on, the perfect environment for agriculture because of those things. And, that's going to be very interesting. That'll affect the US as well. I mean, quite a lot. The areas which will be farmable will shift, because it's just the same parallel around the globe, and I don't personally, I don't think that those changes are decades away. I think they're 5 years away. I think can see it happening now, and I would argue shifting in the way that we're talking about in Refarm Fund is just going ahead of that cycle. It's stopping wasting land to grow feed for animals when you can just use less land and grow food for people. Stopping using so much water when it's a scarce resource. Stopping polluting the planet with chemicals, and actually trying to kind of see how farming can have a positive impact in terms of greenhouse gases and the changes, decelerating the changes that are happening around greenhouse gases.
Wow. How can people help you or support your work? And where can they find you? Do you have a social media presence? Do you have a website?
Yeah, but the best thing at the moment is to go to refarm.fund on the web and just drop a message. You can email me directly, Omaid, OMAID, at refarm.fund, REFARM.FUND. If you do that, we can have a conversation. Specifically, the piece which we're focused on now, I'm very interested in any folks who want to get involved or support the project broadly, in terms of conceptually and where they think our go-to-market could best work. But specifically, the piece we're looking at is accelerating this study. So folks who are connected to similar organizations who have data, who may be able to be partners or collaborate, and so on around that. Also, if you have experience in farming and would like to help us with that study, so get involved to actually kind of be involved in overseeing the various parties who are going to be doing aspects of the study, very, very happy to talk. I'm so, put it this way, I work on several things and this is a real passion project for me, so I'm going to keep it moving till we get things to happen and get traction doing it.
What do you think of vegan activism? Do you think it's effective?
So I think as a marketing guy, I've got a view about different stages of behavior change, let's say. And I think that creating awareness of a topic is one piece of the puzzle. I don't think it necessarily drives change directly. I think so I think the people who are my personal friends and stuff I've done myself to do with drawing attention has its role, and I don't think should stop. But I don't think that any of us should think that that's the job done at all. That it might be that changes the conversation to some extent for a period of time, but actually the conversation needs to, that conversation needs to move into solutions. Most people, say you're talking about diets, people like the taste of meat. People are constantly telling me how they like it.
That's just the weirdest thing to me. I gotta say, even when I
Yeah.
ate it, I didn't like it. So I guess I'm unusual that way.
Yeah, I mean, similar me when I gave it up at 15, I thought there's something wrong with this. It wasn't an animal thing. It was just, I don't know, initially it was just like, this is horrible. I don't, but that's what people, find it delicious and all that. They're very used to it and so on.
I
So
think they find the sugar, fat, and salt delicious because most people just don't eat raw meat. We're not carnivores.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's like they like
wait,
they like the, they like the way
absolutely
it's
not.
prepared. But I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I think about that old saying, put a carrot and a bunny in a playpen with a kid and see which ones they eat,
Yeah. I mean, so I'm just giving them a bit of space to understand them rather than I don't agree with it at all, obviously. But so that someone in that scenario, is unlikely to suddenly have an epiphany and think, I'm eating my friends. Yeah, I'm eating someone who is another person who I should. I respect my dog and my cat, but I do not respect this cow that I've never met. Yeah, and that's a huge thing to change in someone's mind if they're not there. So I think that where they get to is, well, actually this other stuff tastes good. It's it doesn't cost too much. It's easy to get. It's someone told me it's good for me. Well, I kind of I think that's quite good. And actually quite a lot of them will come. To be frank, I think they won't all come until it's so expensive that it's not available to them. And as a marketing guy, I kind of think, well, don't focus on the people who are stuck, because focus on the people you can bring, who are open to it. So like when you see these kind of arguments in social media about kind of very strong advocates for animals versus the people the other way, that's entirely pointless, because the people the other way aren't going to shift their position ever. In the sense of why would we spend our time even talking to those people? They're pointless. It's a waste of time. It's more talking to or influencing people who think, well, actually maybe I do eat too much meat, maybe this isn't very good for me, maybe, and then actually once the awareness is there, then it's a case of solutions. So I know different people have different views on it. I wouldn't say stop. I just say make activism smarter. Focus on the takeout. Focus on the people you can influence. With political campaigning, whether it's on the left or on the right, the people who decide the election are the people in the middle, not the people on the left or the right. So they're the people you can influence. And right now, that's where we're at. That's what we should think about in terms of when we're doing activism. But as I said, and I'll say it again, is that what it comes down to then after that is very much what are the solutions? Enablement, access to food, making it an easy choice. If it's business, make it so that it's a no-brainer financially. Well, you can take this on, and actually you have access to more revenue, or actually you'll make more money, and so on. And I don't. We're a creative bunch. We just need to think that way. I don't think it's beyond the realms of our community to do that. I would say that sometimes particularly in activism, some of my friends who are, let's say, more on the left, find it difficult to hear me when I'm talking about influencing companies, because in the end, that it's not the way that they see the world, that those individuals see the world. But I don't mind. That's up to them. I'm just talking about what I think is a good way forwards to drive system change. And it comes down to kind of make, for companies, it comes down to kind of showing them the business model, showing them it works, it's better than what they're doing now, or setting something up which they can see works better than what they're doing now, so they then copy it, in which case, job done. Imagine we got Refund Fund to get to only to a certain size of business, but actually we PR very publicly that the farmers that we've helped make more money than others, that would have a huge impact on the wider community of farmers, and we wouldn't have to even talk to them. They would just get dragged along, sucked along, but by the positive message that we're talking about. I mean, that's why I think, like those films, I'm really affected by those kind of strong activist slaughterhouse films, but also, but a lot of people are affected by films like Changemakers, I think it's called, where they're talking about, have I got the name right? I may have the name wrong.
Game Changers. Game Changers. They're making a sequel.
Yeah, right. But the point there is, okay, famous people doing brilliantly in whatever they do and are vegan or plant-based. Yeah, easy to identify with and aspire to. Okay, fine. You're not educating them in animal justice. You're just dragging them along through the benefits. But I don't mind. I don't have a problem with that. And I don't think any vegan should. If it works, then that's fine, Sorry, could I ask you, Chef AJ, what's your view on activism? Are you in a similar place, or?
I think everyone has to do it in the way they're comfortable. And when I was younger, remember, I'm doing this for 46 years. As a matter of fact, I'm what they call the OG. I don't know if you can see this button, the old vegan. I did more of the frontline activism. I worked with Last Chance for Animals, and I never would do civil disobedience because I never wanted to get arrested, not because I didn't believe in the cause, but then who would take care of my pets at home, right? I wasn't married, but I did what was called direct action, where you go up to the point where the police officer says, if you go one step further, you'll be arrested. I never went. And part of you feels good doing it, but I'm not so sure those kind of things are effective. Like, there are groups that would destroy laboratories where animal research was happening. And while in theory, I'm happy for that, to free the animals, they just build more laboratories. You know what I mean? So I think people have to do what is in their heart. I feel like people that do animal rescue, though, to me, they're the angels on earth, because that is so sad. So I think I have mixed feelings, I mean, because is it effective? That's the thing. I have a friend that does all the protests and it's great, but is it effective? See, to me, the fact that it becomes effective is more important than just doing it because it makes you feel good, making a statement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I'd support my kind of strong activist friends. But yeah, I mean, there comes a point where you think, are you making an ideological point, or are you trying to make change? And if you step back,
because we do quiet activism. For example, we don't own a fly swatter. We have a relocation program. My husband is an expert at taking a bag, catching the fly, and bringing it outside. We don't kill spiders. We have something called a bugzooka. It's a fantastic thing. It looks like a gun, but what it does is it sucks them up gently, and then you can relocate them. So things like that. But I guess I'm at the point now that I'd rather just do this show than go out and protest on the front lines. I did it when I was younger, and I'm happy for people to do it. But again, does it affect change? And for me, that's the most important thing. Does it get people to change? What gets people to change? And that's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, saving individual animals is obviously amazing for those individuals, and I agree with you that in the various scenarios where animals are released from different whatever environment they're in, I think sometimes when I've been in, like as you, involved in those kind of protest type activism, I'm always in the background because for the reasons, similar reasons to you, but one thing I say to them is if we don't get the message broadcast at scale, there's no point, and actually you need to be careful about what the message is, because obviously the media is not on your side. And, so the creativity comes into what intervention can you make, which is most likely to create the content that's most likely to kind of get on broadcast and be shared widely on social media. And so the thinking around that actually is to do with messaging and marketing more than the actual, any kind of vegan thinking. It's like, what context is most likely to get people talking, and how quickly can you take that context into the message you want to take forwards. So it becomes quite sophisticated kind of media thinking, actually. And I see the groups out there now doing that really, really well. There's quite a few in the UK, and I think there's, actually there's a number in the US still doing it. But if, to be honest with you, like I'm never going to support McDonald's, but them having a plant burger does a lot for us.
Yeah, I get it. That could be a whole nother show. And, I feel like if people just go vegan, to me, that's enough. If that's all they want to do in their lifetime is just stop eating animals, God bless them. That's kind of how I feel about it. So, well, this has been very interesting, and I wish you every success in your project.
Thank you. Thank you, Chef AJ.
I'm just really curious, before I let you go, I know you're not where you normally live in England, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And have you seen an increase in veganism since you've become vegan there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I was alluding to earlier, I think now when you say the word vegan, people know what you're talking about. You do get a negative reaction as well as a positive one, because actually it's one of those words that's been kind of turned into a culture war thing. But actually, the positive side is that in any restaurant, they'll have a vegan menu alongside, and generally speaking, it won't be stuff with the same things with stuff taken out. It'll be good stuff, and then also, like I said earlier, in terms of the supermarkets and the consumer products companies, I think there's loads and loads of plant-based options now, and it's increasing. One thing I will say is that because that's happening, it has a weird effect on the small vegan supermarkets and some vegan restaurants. So the fact that there's more plant-based foods in a regular restaurant actually in some instances means that some vegan places have trouble with their custom and footfall, both supermarkets and independent restaurants. And I just say to anyone listening here, please do keep supporting those guys,
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're so blessed up here where I moved to Northern California that there are 3 restaurants that are not vegan restaurants that are offering vegan menus thanks to the requests, and also doing them without sugar, oil, salt. So it can be done. You just have to be diligent. What drives me crazy though, is when you go to a restaurant and you get like a bowl or a salad, and it might have beans or even tempeh, and then they'll say, you want protein with that? As if you don't get animal products. See, that if I could change that, do you want protein with it? Where's the protein? Like they're thinking if you don't order the chicken, the beef, or the or the fish, or even cheese, that you didn't have protein on your meal.
So there's a big PR job that we all need to do for peas. For one of my theories is that the main protein that many of us are going to be living on in the future is peas. And actually, I'm in Finland at the moment, and one of the things I noticed in some of the farm fields that I saw is that there's a huge amount of peas, whereas last year they were growing other things. Yeah. And I'm wondering if the markets are already shifting to grow a much increased volume of peas for pea protein, because actually pea protein isn't quite the same density of protein as beef, but it's not far off. I don't think it's a coincidence that the vegan bodybuilders are bulking up on pea protein.
Interesting. Well, let's have peas on earth. Give peas a chance. Here's a question from a live viewer, and they're asking, are you pro the killing of 200,000 head of cattle in Ireland? And I Googled it, and it said, according to the Telegraph, Ireland is reportedly considering killing 200,000 cows in the country to meet the European Union's climate targets. Not everyone is a fan of this method.
Oh, okay. So I don't know about that story. I would say, if I could generalize my answer, when people say, what are you going to do with all the animals? I would say that the transitions we're talking about are not overnight. And, and actually it's about not replacing them. There may be space for, some or many of them in sanctuaries, but actually I think in the end, it's about managing down those businesses so that, down to few or none. I don't know why they would kill those 200,000 animals overnight. I guess the reality is, how long are they normally grown for? 8 months. So for me, like, I need to look it up myself. That sounds like a clickbaity story.
No, I mean, I Googled it and it's saying Elon Musk is again, I mean, it's apparently it's real. And, this, I mean, at least as far as the internet is real. So they said the viewer is saying they're doing it in the name of climate change. What do you think of lab grown meat?
I don't think it's ever going to be viable. The reason I say that, I mean, I wouldn't eat it. If someone else wants to eat it, then I wouldn't stop them. That obviously doesn't affect animals, but I think the issue is different, which is that if you look at the economics of it, I can't see how that could be done at the scale required, without at the economics required, because it has to be grown in a super clean environment. Like bacteria grows at, I don't know, 10 plus times more faster than animal cells. So if you don't have almost like a perfectly hygienically clean environment, you can't do it. And so I can see it kind of being the odd PR stunt, whatever. But actually, if because of all those costs, electricity costs and all the clean, whatever it is to keep that clean environment, means that it costs 5 times more, 10 times more than, the same thing from a cow. Why would anyone pay that? I just don't see it as ever getting to scale. I think it's much more likely if we're moving forwards with animal protein, that where the animal protein will come from is precision fermentation processes. Seem to already be getting traction in Finland, where I am now. Apparently, they're already looking at like cow's milk that comes from fermentation, so no cow affected at all in its production. So I mean, again, I wouldn't drink it; it'd make me ill. But I think it's more likely that if we do have a diet with animal protein, it's going to come through precision fermentation. Do you guys know what it is? It's basically doing modifying the DNA of bacteria to produce a different protein, and as it multiplies, like any fermentation process, like the fermentation process for beer or cheese or yogurt, and then it can produce a different protein. And so that doesn't require a clean environment. It doesn't, I think it requires some energy and some water. And then the question is, what are the economics of it? Like, it's in big vats. It's like big brewing vats, so it can be done at scale and so on. I don't know if you guys came across that, but I would bet more on that than lab grown meat.
Well, this is really an interesting conversation. It needs to be continued. And there's a wonderful quote, or not quote, Rich, who watches the show. Thank you, Rich, almost every day. He's a 72-year-old bodybuilder. He says, every time you don't eat meat, you're an activist. Each brick builds the wall. So that's true.
That's true.
We're all doing it. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure meeting you.
Likewise. Yeah. Thanks, Chef AJ. Thanks, everyone. All the best.
Thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time, when my guest is a plant-based doctor named Dr. Dawn Musselem. She's an oncologist at the Mayo Clinic, and she herself is a cancer survivor and a heart transplant survivor. And now she's running marathons, and she's here to inspire you. Have a great week.